Hi, everyone. I'm Keith Whyte, Executive Director of the National Council on Problem Gambling, and I'm proud to be working with the Evergreen Council on Problem Gambling, our affiliate chapter in Washington State, to talk to you next month about gambling and problem gambling in the military. This is a very important issue and one that, frankly, has been underaddressed in our society. First of all, what a lot of people don't know is that we've had slot machines and bingo on military bases for a very, very, very long time. As a matter of fact, these machines were present during the Vietnam era conflict. They were actually stateside back in the 30s and 40s. There was a number of problems at a number of bases in the United States where servicemen developed gambling addiction to playing slots on bases. Based on a report by the General Accounting Office, there are over 3,000 slot machines at United States military bases outside of the continental United States. These machines generate over $100 million in revenue a year. So that means about $1 billion is gambled by servicemen and their dependents every year. And the military, or Department of Morale, Welfare, and Recreation, makes $100 million a year off service personnel and their dependents. So in addition to these overseas slots, you do have a lot of gambling on bases in the United States. There's large bingo games at many of our bases, and these bingo games are sanctioned and organized, by a wide variety of groups on base. But they can generate an incredible amount of money. And then, of course, troops always have access to cards and increasingly internet gambling. So there's a lot of gambling going on base, both overseas on the military's own slot machines, as well as stateside. With bingo and card playing on base, and then of course soldiers can leave base or go on the internet to find other forms of gambling. One of the things that makes gambling and gambling addiction in the military so important as a policy issue is that we believe, and the evidence clearly shows, military personnel are at higher risk for gambling problems. This is no surprise to the clinicians in the audience because, of course, many of the characteristics of those who serve in the military are also high-risk characteristics in the population. When you look at the impact of gambling and problem gambling on the military, it's not just the soldiers and airmen and Marines and sailors themselves, it's also their family members. Because remember, the overseas slots are only available to military personnel and their dependents. And at least the military personnel have their unit to bond with, to help take care of them. The dependents are often left on their own. And we know that a relatively high percentage of calls or inquiries about gambling problems are not from the service personnel themselves, but from their dependents who are isolated on base. At many of our overseas bases, they are linguistically and culturally isolated. And so you have family members that turn to gambling and turn to those slots as a means of addressing their stress, depression, social isolation. I think one of the most important things to consider when we're looking at the impact of gambling and problem gambling on the military is that it puts into high relief some of the gaps that gambling and gambling addiction policy often falls into. So at the military level, there's often a split between how the Army deals with it versus the Navy. There's often a gap between how the chaplains address this and the behavioral health personnel. There's a gap between active duty and veterans. There's a big gap for Reserve and National Guard forces who are only called into federal service and have their benefits for a relatively short period of time. And all of these factors are important from a policy aspect, but it's also important from a treatment and a behavioral health aspect. From an individual perspective, unfortunately, the amount of prevention and treatment and assistance that you would get for gambling addiction in the military depends so much on the happy accident of your branch of service, on where you serve, on whether you're active duty or reserve, on whether you're reserve or guard, and whether you're a guard or a veteran. And so I think there's a lot we can do just to harmonize policy and make sure that those who serve have a common set of protections, a common set of treatment options, regardless of their branch of service, regardless of their status, and regardless of where they may serve and where they may develop their addiction. So the good news about gambling and gambling addiction in the military is that there are a number of programs that are really doing some phenomenal work with this high-risk population. So obviously the Cleveland Brecksville Veterans Medical Center has the oldest residential treatment program for gamblers in the world, and it's exclusively for, of course, military personnel and their families in the VA system. There's some innovative efforts in Las Vegas. There's some innovative VA clinics going on around the country. And there's some really interesting data that's starting to come out of the VA. For example, one study found that one of the biggest predictors in this study population of homelessness among veterans was whether or not they had an active gambling problem. Because, make no mistake, we need the military personnel and their dependents deserve programs that are focused on their particular needs and culture. And I think it's not enough just to say we have a treatment program. We need to make sure that when we're doing prevention, for example, within this population, we're speaking to some of the specific experiences and culture that are found there in the military. I'll be talking a lot about the efforts that we've undertaken with all of our state affiliate chapters to push for legislation on Capitol Hill that will ensure those who serve have access to world-class prevention, treatment, and research resources on gambling problems. From the very early days of the National Council, our two co-founders were intimately involved in dealing with gambling addiction in the military. Dr. Robert Custer was chief of psychiatry at the VA, and Monsignor Dunn was a Silver Star decorated Army veteran himself before he served as chaplain at the New York City Police Department. Both of these men had deep familiarity with the stresses of military life, the difficulty that some veterans had in returning to civilian life, and the way that gambling can be both a risk factor and a contributor to both their own problems and problems of others. And so since 1972, the National Council has been really involved in this issue. And there's a long succession of leaders, including Washington State's own Dr. Chuck Maurer, who served in the military and who also came through in their psychology training through the Veterans Administration Center there in Brecksville, outside of Cleveland, Ohio. So this has been an issue for us literally since day one.